March 7, 1944. In the heart of the Pacific, the sea was calm, almost too calm. Aboard Japan's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, Taihō, Vice Admiral Jizaburō Ozawa gazed across the endless horizon. To the men around him, he was a symbol of unwavering confidence, a rock in the storm of war. But inside, Ozawa felt something else gnawing at him, a quiet, creeping fear that Japan's time was running out. He had spent his entire life mastering the art of naval warfare, of tactics, strategy, and discipline. But this war, the one raging across the vast expanse of the Pacific, wasn't just about courage or brilliant maneuvers. It was about something far more fundamental, something far more powerful: industry. As Ozawa stood upon the armored flight deck of his magnificent ship, he couldn't have known that the true weapon deciding the fate of the Pacific wasn't a torpedo or a bomb, but a factory. The Taihō was the pride of the Japanese Imperial Navy, the most advanced carrier the empire had ever built. She was a floating fortress, heavily armored, fast and modern. It was said she could withstand damage that would have sent any carrier before her to the bottom of the sea. To the world, Taihō was proof that Japan's navy still had teeth, that its fighting spirit was unbroken. But Ozawa, the man tasked with leading this fleet, knew the stark reality behind the propaganda. This was Japan's only new large carrier to be completed in nearly 3 long years. In that same period, on the other side of the ocean, the United States had commissioned 17 to 1. The numbers were staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. The once mighty Japanese shipyards, symbols of precision and national pride, were now gasping for air. They were running out of everything: high-quality steel, fuel to power their fleets, and most critically, skilled men to build and crew the ships. Each new launch was slower than the last. Every new design was a desperate attempt to stay relevant. In a war, Japan was no longer industrially equipped to fight. Ozawa wasn't really commanding a fleet of warships anymore. He was commanding ghosts. Ghosts of an empire that was fading faster than anyone dared to say aloud. While Japan strained its entire industrial capacity to build a single ship, America was building entire floating cities by the dozen. Take the Essex-class carriers, for example. These weren't just ships. They were assembly line miracles. From keel laying to commissioning, some were completed in just over a year. Shipyards like Newport News and Quincy became relentless engines of war, launching a new carrier every few months. They standardized designs, streamlined production, and mobilized a workforce that seemed to have no limits. The American industrial machine wasn't just building ships. It was overwhelming its enemy with sheer undeniable quantity. It was a war of production, and Japan was losing catastrophically. So when Ozawa looked out at the sea from the deck of his prized Taihō, he wasn't just seeing the waves. He was seeing the tide of history turning against him. He knew that for every skilled pilot he had, America could train 10 more. For every gallon of precious fuel he burned, America had oceans of it. The Taihō was a masterpiece of engineering, a testament to Japanese ingenuity. But in the grand calculus of total war, a single masterpiece is no match for a flood. It was a brutal lesson in modern warfare. Battles are won by soldiers and sailors, but wars are won by factories and shipyards. The fate of the Pacific was being sealed, not in the fiery clashes of naval battles, but in the noisy, sprawling industrial heartlands thousands of miles away. The roar of American factories was the true sound of victory, and it was a sound that would soon drown out everything else. Picture this: San Francisco, Philadelphia, Newport News. It's the early 1940s, and these cities aren't just cities anymore. They're the heart of a colossal machine, an industrial symphony that echoes day and night, a sound that will change the course of history. They called it the arsenal of democracy, and its rhythm never ever stopped. This wasn't just a job for soldiers. This was a national calling. Men, women, farmers leaving their fields, mechanics from local garages, even teachers stepping out of the classroom, millions joined the effort. Factories ran 24 hours a day. Workers took shifts one after another, ensuring that no machine ever rested, no torch ever cooled. Imagine entire families working under the same vast shipyard roof, some designing blueprints in drafty offices, others welding steel plates in a shower of sparks, and still others driving rivets with a deafening roar. It was organized chaos, a beautiful, powerful storm of human will, and from this storm miracles of steel emerged. The numbers are staggering, almost unbelievable even today. In just 32 months, less than 3 years, the United States produced 17 fleet carriers, 10 light carriers, and over 100 escort carriers. To put that in perspective, these weren't just boats. They were floating cities, complex weapons of war built at a pace the world had never seen. Across the Pacific, Japan's top naval commanders were left in a state of shock. They had planned their war with meticulous precision, believing their martial spirit and years of preparation gave them an unbeatable edge. But they hadn't counted on this. Even the famously calm and disciplined Admiral Ozawa couldn't comprehend the scale of what was happening. How could a country that hadn't known war on its own soil, a nation of consumers and civilians, suddenly move faster, build stronger, and fight harder than an empire forged in the crucible of battle for decades? The answer wasn't just about throwing more people at the problem. It was something deeper, something more revolutionary. The answer was innovation. America's secret weapon wasn't just its immense manpower, it was its method. While traditional shipbuilding involved constructing a vessel from the keel up in one single dry dock, a long and laborious process, U.S. engineers completely flipped the script. They pioneered and perfected the technique of prefabrication. Think of it like building with giant Lego blocks. They divided these massive warships into smaller, manageable sections. These modules were built simultaneously, often in different locations. One factory might specialize in building the hull sections. Another, hundreds of miles away, could be constructing the flight deck. A third would be assembling the engine rooms. It was a decentralized, parallel processing approach to manufacturing on a scale never before attempted. Then, these enormous, pre-built sections would be transported to the final assembly yard. Cranes, looking like giant metal beasts, would lift and piece them together like a colossal puzzle. This modular construction meant that work could happen on all parts of the ship at the same time, not one after the other. It slashed construction time from years to mere months. In some incredible cases, escort carriers were completed in just a few weeks. So when Admiral Ozawa looked at his intelligence reports, he wasn't just seeing ships. He was seeing the product of a radical new way of thinking. It wasn't just America's factories that were outproducing Japan. It was America's ingenuity. This ability to adapt, to innovate under pressure, and to mobilize not just hands, but minds, was the true power behind the arsenal of democracy. It was a lesson in industrial might that would redefine global power for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. When all the parts came together, they just fit perfectly. This was speed, achieved through organization. This new method turned unskilled workers into specialists. It streamlined production so efficiently that some American carriers were built in less than a year. It was a revolution in manufacturing. Meanwhile, Japan held on to its old ways. Craftsmanship, precision, tradition. These were noble values, born of pride and patience, but they had no place in a war of machines. America wasn't just building ships, it was building an unstoppable industrial wave. By the time the new Japanese carrier Taihō finally left port, the war she was meticulously built for no longer existed. The world had moved on, and she was already a relic of a bygone era. In early 1944, Admiral Jizaburō Ozawa was appointed commander of the first mobile fleet, the very heart of Japan's remaining naval power. The emperor still clung to the hope that this fleet could strike a decisive, war-winning blow. But Ozawa, a pragmatist, knew the truth. The enemy wasn't just the American fleet across the sea. The real enemy was time itself. Every single month, America's fleet grew larger, stronger. Every week, fresh pilots, new ships, and advanced planes flooded the Pacific. The gap was widening and it was becoming an abyss. Then, in June of 1944, the moment of destiny arrived. The Battle of the Philippine Sea. Ozawa's flagship, the mighty Taihō, would lead the charge. On paper, it was a battle. In reality, it was a desperate gamble. Japan could muster around 430 aircraft. The Americans, they had over 900 waiting for them. It was a staggering disparity. Still, the Imperial Japanese Navy, bound by honor and duty, prepared to fight to the very last plane. They would not surrender, but fate had other crueler plans in store. Ozawa's greatest ship, the pride of the fleet, would soon become his greatest, most tragic loss. June 19, 1944. The morning sun burned hot over the vast, empty expanse of the Philippine Sea. On the bridge of the Taihō, Admiral Ozawa watched as his carriers turned into the wind, their decks alive with activity. He had a bold plan, a plan he believed could turn the tide. His planes had a longer range than their American counterparts. He would strike first, from a distance the enemy couldn't retaliate from. After attacking the U.S. fleet, his planes would land on nearby islands, refuel and rearm, ready to strike again. It was a complex, daring strategy. If it worked, it could be a stunning victory. But in war, complexity is the enemy of success. The plan depended on perfect timing, flawless communication, and a degree of luck that had long since abandoned the Japanese Empire. As the first wave of Japanese planes roared off their decks, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. These were some of Japan's best remaining pilots, flying for their lives and their nation. But beneath the surface of the waves, an unseen hunter was closing in. The American submarine USS Albacore had found them. It had slipped through the Japanese destroyer screen, its periscope fixed on the biggest target in the fleet, the flagship Taihō. The Albacore's captain had a shot, but his torpedo data computer was malfunctioning. He had to rely on a manual calculation, a guess. He fired a spread of 6 torpedoes, a desperate shot in the dark. Aboard Taihō, a sharp-eyed pilot spotted the torpedo wakes streaking through the water. He didn't hesitate. In an ultimate act of sacrifice, he deliberately dove his plane into the path of one of the incoming torpedoes, causing it to detonate harmlessly. His sacrifice saved his ship from a direct hit, but it couldn't save them from their fate. Another torpedo, one of the 5 remaining, found its mark. It struck Taihō on the starboard side, near the forward aircraft elevator. The initial damage seemed manageable. The ship barely even shuddered, but the impact had ruptured aviation fuel tanks, and highly volatile vapor began to fill the ship's poorly ventilated hangar decks. A single spark was all it would take. Hours passed. The crew worked frantically to contain the damage, unaware of the invisible explosive gas filling the ship around them. Then, a well-intentioned but disastrous order was given. To clear the fumes, the ship's ventilation system was turned on to full blast. Instead of venting the gas overboard, it spread the explosive mixture throughout the entire ship. At 2:32 p.m., a massive internal explosion ripped Taihō apart from the inside out. The armored flight deck, designed to withstand bombs, was heaved upwards and then collapsed. Fire engulfed the vessel. Just 2 hours later, the pride of the Japanese fleet, the unsinkable carrier, slipped beneath the waves, taking over 1,600 of her crew with her. It was a catastrophic loss, not just of a ship, but of a dream. The Battle of the Philippine Sea would become known to American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan lost 2 of its largest carriers and over 300 aircraft in a single day, a blow from which their naval aviation would never recover. For Admiral Ozawa, rescued from the sinking Taihō, it was the bitter end. His greatest ship was gone, his fleet was shattered, and the war was, for all intents and purposes, lost. The story of Taihō is a powerful reminder that in modern warfare, it isn't just about the skill of the warrior or the quality of the weapon, but the relentless, overwhelming power of industrial might. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. A decisive moment in the Pacific War is about to unfold. Japan's Imperial Navy, under the command of Vice Admiral Jizaburō Ozawa, has gathered its remaining strength. 9 aircraft carriers, 5 battleships, and a swarm of cruisers and destroyers form the mobile fleet. Their prize jewel? The brand-new state-of-the-art aircraft carrier, Taihō. She was the pride of Japan, the pinnacle of their naval engineering. With an armored flight deck designed to withstand American bombs, Ozawa, aboard his flagship, Taihō, is confident. He plans to lure the American fleet into a trap, using land-based aircraft from the Marianas Islands to weaken them before his carriers deliver the final blow. He believes this is Japan's chance to turn the tide of the war. But beneath the waves, a silent, unseen predator is lurking. The American submarines of Task Force 17, nicknamed the Silent Service, are patrolling the very waters Ozawa's fleet is sailing into. They are the eyes and ears of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, stalking their prey like sharks. At 8:10 in the morning, one of these hunters, the USS Albacore, spots a massive silhouette on the horizon. It's the Taihō. Commander James W. Blanchard, captain of the Albacore, knows this is the target of a lifetime. Despite his fire control computer malfunctioning, he calculates the shot manually. He fires a spread of 6 torpedoes. 5 miss their mark, but one, just one, runs true. It strikes the Taihō amidships, right near the forward aircraft elevator. On the bridge of the Taihō, the jolt is felt, but the initial damage seems manageable. Admiral Ozawa remains calm, assured by reports that his flagship is not in immediate danger. The ship's speed is only slightly reduced, and the flooding is quickly contained. The crew seals the damaged compartments, and the flight deck remains operational. To Ozawa and his staff, it seems like they've weathered a minor inconvenience. The battle plan continues. He orders his first wave of aircraft to launch, confident that his unsinkable carrier has shrugged off the American attack. But deep within the steel heart of the ship, a fatal error has been made. In their haste to control the damage, the crew made a critical mistake. To clear the explosive gasoline fumes accumulating in the damaged elevator shaft, the ship's damage control officer ordered the ventilation system to be opened and run at full blast. It was a catastrophic decision. Instead of venting the fumes overboard, the system circulated the highly volatile vapor throughout the entire ship. For hours, the Taihō became a floating bomb, ticking down to zero. The crew, unaware of the invisible danger, continued their duties. Planes were being refueled and rearmed. The air below deck grew thick with the smell of gasoline. Then, at around 2:30 in the afternoon, it happened. A single spark, perhaps from a generator or a stray electrical fault, ignited the supercharged atmosphere. An immense explosion ripped through the carrier from the inside out. The armored flight deck, designed to keep bombs out, now served to contain the blast, directing its force sideways and downwards, tearing the ship apart. Flames erupted from the hangars, engulfing planes and men. Secondary explosions followed as bombs and fuel detonated in a chain reaction. Hundreds were killed instantly. The pride of the Japanese Navy was transformed into a blazing inferno. By 3:30 p.m., the magnificent Taihō listed heavily, her fate sealed. She slipped beneath the waves, taking over 1,600 of her crew with her. Admiral Ozawa was rescued, silent and shaken, forced to transfer his flag to a nearby cruiser. He would later write, "I have lost not a ship, but the heart of my fleet." With Taihō's demise, so too sank Japan's dream of naval supremacy. The battle, which became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, was a devastating loss for Japan, from which its navy would never recover. A single torpedo, a simple mistake, and an empire's ambition was consumed by smoke and steel. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, often called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, was a devastating blow to the Japanese Imperial Navy. In just 2 days, they lost 3 aircraft carriers and over 600 aircraft, a loss from which their naval aviation would never recover. Admiral Jizaburō Ozawa, the commander of the Japanese fleet, had thrown everything he had into a single decisive battle, hoping to turn the tide of the war. He had the best pilots Japan could offer, men who had honed their skills since the attack on Pearl Harbor. They were brave, they were experienced, and they were utterly outmatched. But the story of their defeat doesn't just lie in the smoke and fire of that naval engagement. It began years earlier in the humming factories and bustling shipyards of the United States. While Japan celebrated its early victories, America was undergoing an industrial transformation of unprecedented scale. Think about it. In 1941, when the war began for the U.S., its navy was formidable, but it was not the global behemoth it would become. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a wake-up call that echoed not just through military command, but through every corner of American industry. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had set an audacious goal to make America the arsenal of democracy. And the nation responded. Factories that once made cars now churned out tanks and planes. Shipyards that built commercial vessels were now laying the keels for warships at a dizzying pace. The numbers are staggering. Take the Liberty ships, for example. These cargo vessels were essential for supplying the war effort across 2 oceans. Initially, it took over 230 days to build one. By the end of the war, thanks to prefabrication and assembly line techniques, a Liberty ship could be built in just 42 days. One was even famously completed in under 5 days as a publicity stunt. This wasn't just shipbuilding, it was a revolution. This industrial miracle was happening across the board. While Japan struggled to replace its losses, often sending pilots into combat with minimal training, the US was not only replacing its losses, but expanding its forces exponentially. New and improved aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat were rolling off assembly lines and straight into the hands of well-trained pilots. The Hellcat was designed specifically to counter the Japanese Zero. It was faster, more durable, and had superior firepower. By the time of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, American pilots were flying these superior machines, backed by a logistical chain that Japan could only dream of. Meanwhile, America's shipyards continued their relentless march. By 1945, the US Navy had commissioned more than 100 aircraft carriers of all sizes. 100. Japan, the nation that had pioneered carrier warfare at Pearl Harbor, had none left. Not a single one. The industrial gap had become an unbridgeable chasm. Admiral Ozawa, a brilliant strategist, lived to see the end of the war, but for the rest of his life, he was haunted by a single powerful truth. The war was never truly lost at sea. It was lost in the factories, in the foundries, the shipyards, and in the hands of the millions of workers who built faster than Japan could fight. In the grand narrative of history, we often focus on the battles, the thunder of cannons, the strategic genius of commanders, the heroic sacrifices. But sometimes, the most decisive battle is fought far from the front lines, in places that never see a shot fired in anger. For Admiral Ozawa and the Japanese Empire, that final unwinnable battle wasn't against the American fleet on the waves. It was against an enemy that was invisible to military strategy and unstoppable by sheer courage. It was a war against industry, against innovation, and ultimately against time itself. As the Pacific Ocean swallowed the last hope of Japan's imperial fleet, the world learned a profound lesson about modern warfare. Courage can win battles, but it is industry that wins wars. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next one.